Not too long ago in China, an anti-natalist policy existed and controlled the quality of people's lives. This caused burdens to different families and developed threats to the population during one period of time. Yet, during the subsequent period, the policy left behind positive effects regarding healthcare for women and children and yielded numerous economic benefits. Even so, life was made different depending on your perspective and situation. Think about a life as a family's only child in China. You're the primarily prized member of your parents and grandparents, but as you become an adult, you will have the responsibility over taking care of them and providing for them. Also, depending on your biological sex, you will be treated differently, either by being exalted or being discriminated against. Additionally, depending on when you were born, you'll live this way for about 3 decades. Welcome to Experiencing Life under the One-Child Policy. The One-Child Policy resulted in many long-term effects in China, but it also had a gradually built-up cause and short-term causes following it. For example, the main and longest developed cause of the formulation of this policy historically dates to 1949, when Mao Zedong reigned and led in China. Mao Zedong was the Chinese Communist Party leader from 1935 until his death. The cause of the one-child policy roots back to his encouragement of Chinese population growth to follow tradition and to boost the morale of the country, but not to be pro-natalist. Inevitably, his desire to establish confidence in his country led to a terribly vast population that birth control and family planning could not fix. But these things had to be promoted in 1959 by the government and were still barely effective towards the cause. Zedong's belief transitioned, and he began to stress the importance of birth control, flowing with previous promotions and establishing the Great Leap policies. The Great Leap policies were meant to organize the large population in China, adjusting the agriculture and industrial issues in China. However, his ideals soon changed in 1957 when he promoted families to have more children once again. He thought it was still good for China to have more people. Then from 1962 to when Mao Zedong passed, family planning was implemented by the government. Overall, because Mao's goal for China changed numerous times, he left the population unstable and caused famine throughout China. After Mao Zedong's death, Deng Xiaoping was the paramount leader of China from 1978 until 1989. Xiaoping noticed that the vast population was putting a consequential strain on China's resources and would make it difficult for the central government to provide for and feed the nation. Moreover, he said that a large population was a hindrance on China's road to becoming wealthy. So Xiaoping developed an anti-natalist policy and slogan called Wang Ji Xiao in 1973. This slogan means later, longer, and fewer, promoting later marriages, longer intervals between births, and fewer children. Shortly after, counting as a short-term cause of making this policy, Wang Zhizhou developed into one of the most important social policies in the history of China in 1979, the One-Child Policy. On September 25, 1980, China's central government sent out a public letter obligating all citizens to start following the One-Child Policy. The central government demanded that its people follow their social responsibilities when it came to following and obeying what the policy both limited and required, having to cooperate with stipulations. The primary order of the one-child policy, which the policy's name originates from, is families being limited to having only one child. This was heavily stimulated through the increase in availability of contraceptive use locally and anti-natalist benefits such as financial incentives and provided job opportunities. However, this policy was also forced onto citizens of China. Families were forced to receive sterilization, have abortions, and people would face the consequences of acquiring sanctions if they didn't obey the policy. For example, a young girl, Shreya, born as her family's second child, doesn't have an identity because of consequences enforced on her family. Her mother was unemployed, and their family was fined a large amount of money. Furthermore, propaganda on billboards, signs, and other local images were incorporated throughout China. Even though the measures were taken to enforce this policy were immense, there were some exceptions that played a part in its uneven distribution. Adults and ethnic minority groups could have another child, and if a parent's firstborn was disabled, they could have another child. Additionally, families in rural areas were allowed to have 2 children. That alone, with their protest to the policy and their harsher usage of the policy in urban areas, led to the uneven distribution of the one-child policy throughout China. The choices that China's government made are crucial to their outcomes, since if they were less strict, China's population wouldn't be where it is today. Also, because of the strictly forced sterilizations and abortions in the cities of China, the total fertility rate in China dropped rapidly and significantly. Moreover, as the countryside areas of China were resistant to the social law, it became less effective over time, causing its later application to be even tighter, with less exceptions in the 1990s. As the policy continued, the government noticed the showing effects, leading to the loosening of the policy in 2013. If one member of a couple was an only child, they could have another child. 3 years later, the policy officially ended. This extravagant policy had a few negative but also positive effects on China. Children in China, especially young girls, had more available resources dedicated to their use. Women were also free from continuous pregnancy and grew more involved in work outside of their homes, contributing to economic development in China. But these positive effects are most likely overwhelmed by the number of poor influences of the one-child policy controlled by China's communist government. For example, China, as many other countries, has held a tradition of favoring males over females due to cultural preferences for males and their historic responsibility over their parents and grandparents. Moreover, because of forced abortions and families only permitting to have one child, parents would often neglect, abandon, or abort female babies in favor of having a male. These factors combined resulted in a dreadfully uneven sex ratio between males and females of 1.21 in 1990, much higher than the 1.03 from previous years. In the year 2020, there were about 35 million more men than women in China. So in time, this led to some men in China unable to find a spouse.
Women leave to go far away to the cities to work. They don't come back. They marry men there and don't come back.
Here in Hainan, island-wide, there are 130 men for every 100 women, and in some places, the ratio is as bad as 170 to 100.
We are poor. I guess we can work harder, but finding a wife is even harder than making money.
Even crime rates had increased as younger men who were more suspect to risky behavior and sex trafficking increased to replace the empty number of women.
As a result of that, sex trafficking against girls and women become a huge problem inside China.
Moreover, the fast-growing use of birth control, family planning, abortions, sterilizations, and other forms of contraceptives heavily decreased the TFR in China. Less children were being born, resulting in at-the-timing age adults making up the majority group in China. Then, when these only children matured, there weren't enough employed positions being filled as aged workers retired. Eventually, the dependent age group outnumbered the working age group, which caused the number of workers in China to diminish. Furthermore, the treasuring of children included being fed more. Resources and nutritionists were more dedicated to families' only children, which is different from traditional diets dedicated to multiple. Most of these children grew to be obese and overweight. The distribution of obesity increased by 4 times from 1985 and 2020, a disturbingly short amount of time. The final straw that led to the turning point of the people's responsibilities and rights demanded by the government was the population that decreased to a dangerous degree even when the policies were slackened in 2013. Couples still turned to having one child due to the cost of having two. The population was below the replacement level, and the TFR that remained low brought pressures to the central government in China. Because of these many consequences of the one-child policy, it was abolished on October 1st, 2015. China demands of its people changed. It transitions from being anti-natalist to pro-natalist, encouraging families to have 2 children, offering incentive to families that did, and rewarding cash bonuses. However, it's unlikely that the population will increase substantially in China, which is the legacy provided by the tragic policy. The people of China had adapted their mindsets to the idea of having one child was preferable and easier to handle. Accordingly, this contributed to the non-increasing population of China. Overall, the one-child policy was a tragic event affecting the majority of China negatively. It limited families to only having one child, demanding that they follow their social responsibilities and collaborate with the requirements of the anti-natalist policy. The citizens of China lacked their appropriate rights as well, as the central government didn't make a wide prediction on how this policy would deeply impact infrastructure and families. Despite this policy having positive effects, they overruled by long-lasting issues regarding the sex ratio, dependency ratio, and total population.